You can hear me now.
Yeah.
Oh, that was a really close call. But I can't see any of you, so I hope you can see me really well. Okay, good. Potential disaster averted by headphone. Hi, everyone. How many are you there?
Over 100.
Oh my God, that's a lot of people. A lot of people. I hope you're having fun. All right. I don't know where I should start. I guess you should tell me where to start. Oh, okay. This is funny because I was going to ask that question. So this is a teacher being put on the spot. Roles have been reversed. So just interestingly, just something I was thinking about just a few minutes ago, maybe 10, 15 minutes ago, about the fact that I think the greatest lesson for me this year has been the fact that I know so many people who understand the climate negotiations at the UNFCCC level, but very few people actually understand what climate justice is. We seem to have built a community around the negotiations, the intricacies, the words, the acronyms, the conferences, events, but very little understanding, very little time taken to actually think through, to stop and pause and ask, what does climate justice mean? So for myself, the Kenyan woman, as a woman of color, as a black woman, a woman living in Africa, a woman whose country has a history of colonization, neo-colonization. I'm anti-capitalist, obviously, for those who don't know. Climate justice for me basically means dismantling the systems of patriarchy, dismantling sexism, dismantling the capitalist system that has created grave inequalities among people, between nations. Climate justice means rich, developed countries whose wealth has come off the backs of Latin America, Asia, Africa, paying back their historical debt. This is what climate justice means to me. Climate justice means rewriting the rules of the World Trade Organization, intellectual property rights. So it seems very complicated, but for me, climate justice is not just a term. I'm being very cognizant of the geopolitics, of the historical, political, economic, cultural issues and intersections that make up the climate crisis. So my climate justice stands for dismantling the systems that have created inequalities.
Yeah.
Was there another question? I'm not quite sure I heard it. All right. Okay, so I'll just go back a little bit. So I primarily have a background in communications, but along the way I became a political ecologist. I am part of so many wonderful collectives, mostly based in the Global South, the radical feminist groups challenging power, challenging the way resources are distributed. And just yesterday, as of yesterday, I got a job yesterday. So I'm now going to be part of a wonderful international feminist organization that all of you must look up. It's called AWID, and I'll be working as a coordinator with women human rights defenders, and especially in the extractive industries, because we do know that in as much as women are affected gravely by the climate crisis, they're actually at the front lines challenging oil companies, challenging coal companies, challenging agribusiness companies that are trying to patent their seeds, trying to push monoculture, trying to push genetically modified organisms. So I'd say that I've been really blessed, if I should use the term, not in a spiritual way, but I've just been really blessed to be part of amazing, wonderful, radical collectives in the global South, working to not just climate justice, but social justice in general.
Woo.
Do you want me to keep? I don't know. I'm not quite sure. Do you want me to keep speaking, or do you want me to? Do you want to ask questions? How do you want it to go? Okay. So, all right. I have like 10 more minutes left, right? All right. Well, I just wrote down a few. I just basically wrote down a few things. I don't want this to come out as I'm not a teacher. I don't know any more than all of you know. I love to think as this is a conversation of peers, conversation of people who are in the same movement and who want to elevate the discourse around climate justice and to build stronger and more powerful movements. So one of the things I'd really love, one of the things, again, you asked the question of what climate justice is, and I always love, it's crazy because now I can't see all of you and I can't ask this question because I really love hearing what people's idea of climate justice is. So I'll just basically go to the second question of basically the second thing of we need, one of the things that I'd say that we've not been able to see, and I can say this as coming from the global South, we haven't had a system approach to the climate crisis. And when I began, the question of what does climate justice mean to me? And if you recall, I mentioned the World Trade Organization, for example. One of the things about coming from where I come from, you soon realize that things have much more meaning, that things are so much more complicated than we like to think that they are. So, for example, we do know one of the biggest reasons why the UNFCCC negotiations have been so slow, or we've been actually progressing, we haven't been making the kind of progress that we're supposed to be making, even as we clearly see the impacts of the climate crisis. We also have the sciences in and say that we're no longer in the age of where there's a negotiation of whether climate change exists or not. I think that's a settled debate, especially for me, that's a settled debate. But we haven't quite been able to link how the oppressive systems work. Whatever is passed when it comes to the economies, how the economies functioned. We do know that there's a lot at stake when you talk about leave the oil in the soil, the coal in the hole, and the tar sands in the land, and no way you're going to frack on our lands. It goes back to the fact that the economic models that have been built, the people who control the businesses, the corporations, don't want to let that go, don't want to let the profit go, because we do know that it's profit above every other thing. And we do know that for those of us who are in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, and also those, especially those in First Nations, Native American territories in America and Canada, and also those in the Pacific, the wealth of the world has been built through exploitation. So we do know that the biggest reason why we haven't yet made progress in the UNFCCC goes back to the economic model that we have. And it's taken so much time for people to actually realize and engage with that particular system. To engage in the fact that how do we produce the food that we eat? 70% of the food that's produced in the world is produced by women, It's produced by smallholder farmers on less and less of land, because we have agribusiness companies like Monsanto, and I hope I can mention names here. We have corporations like Monsanto. We have Yara, the largest fertilizer company in the world. We have Syngenta. We have Cargill. All these organizations coming together and deciding that this is how the world is going to form, kicking out people from their lands, from their territory, our diets being modified. Looking at the oil companies, the same thing, the same companies that are in agribusiness, they're the same companies in the fossil fuel industries. It's important I really say it's really important for all of us to see how all these systems are connected. Because if we don't take a systems approach to the climate crisis, then there are a lot of blind spots. And also something else that I'm going to speak about, because I identify as an ecofeminist, the exploitation of women. Going back again to the fact that 70% of the food produced is produced by smallholder farmers. In a continent like Africa, 75% of all agricultural workers are women, and in the whole agricultural chain. And specifically, those who produce food, 70% of them are women. But women are the hungriest in the world. You can clearly see how the climate crisis, how patriarchy, how sexism also works to disenfranchise already marginalized groups. We can see the same thing for indigenous communities all over. Indigenous communities, for example, in Latin America, where false solutions are being pushed, carbon markets. We've been told that carbon markets are a solution, but they're not. You cannot solve the climate crisis using the same framework that created the crisis that we're in. And we need to be very wary of techno fixes, whether it's geoengineering or whatever else everyone wants to do. We need to go back to what created the climate crisis, what systems interact to create a select group of powerful and privileged. And that's the only way to be able to move forward. And another thing I'd like to talk about basically is we need to constantly reimagine our energy system. We talk a lot about clean energy, which is absolutely beautiful. But for me, climate justice is not just a matter of changing one system to another. It's very easy to replicate the same systems of oppression in our movements. It's important to remember when you talk about renewable energy, when you talk about clean energy, we're talking about decentralized energy system, local energy systems, democratic energy systems. We also need to negotiate the power relations that we have in our own movements, in our own communities. Otherwise, we risk replicating the same systems of oppression that are in the fossil fuel industry. We also need to transform gender relations, going back to the effect of patriarchy. For those of us who do a lot of feminist work, we'll talk about patriarchal capitalism. How that happens, where we say that bodies must be constructed in a particular way. We also need to resist the privatization of the commons. And we need to really this is one thing that is really close to my heart, because I see a lot of conversations, a lot of talk of, maybe if we left it to corporations, privatization is not an answer. When we say that rights cannot be privatized, when we say that our rights, the markets decide what our rights are, we've been doing it for so many years. Europe has had austerity the last since 2008, which is something that Africa, Latin America, and Asia, whatever's happening in Greece, for example, is not new to us. We've had it as structural adjustment programs since the 80s. So defunding of our agricultural system, defunding of our infrastructure, our education, Africa, Asia, Latin America, can already tell you 30 years later what the impact of the privatization of rights does to people. When you talk about the agricultural system in Africa and the myriad of problems that we face, including hunger, can directly be traced to the economic policies and systems that we have and that have been pushed by organizations such as the IMF and the World Bank. And we do know that at the UNFCCC level, and I know I keep going back to it because the COP is a month and a half, and I hope to see all of you wonderful people there. We do know that the UN space has been captured. For those of us for anyone who's been going for the last 3-4 years, the space for civil society, the space for dissent, the space for young people has been shrinking. But at the same time, the space for corporations. VW, with its ridiculous emission scandal, is able to advertise or sponsor the COP. We must be very wary of the multilateral spaces such as the UN being captured. Those spaces they may not be perfect, but these are spaces that we need to guard against corporations, against international financial institutions that have a vested interest that are controlled by corporations. And finally, I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not. It's a bit. It's a bit different when you're speaking like this, and you're not. I'm not seeing all of you. One of the things I'd love to say is that we need to reinforce the radical idea that everything we are fighting for is a right. It's not a. It's. These are not privileges. The right to, the right to food, the right to clean air, the right to infrastructure, mass transit systems, the right for indigenous people, for women to own land. These are not privileges. These are our rights, and these are rights that we demand. And it's important that we constantly and continually fight to dismantle every system that bars us from getting our rights. So I don't know really what more to add, but I'm really hoping one thing, maybe just a final note is just to touch a little bit on solidarity. I'd love to assume that most of you who are there are young, white, radical, fiery climate justice advocates from Europe. And so I need to take a step back and talk about one thing. I mean, issues of race are alive, We talk about environmental racism, Just the mere fact that Africa, for example, has produced the least amount of emissions, but the climate crisis is already, we're going to be affected the worst by the climate crisis. There's no money at the negotiation level. Very little money is coming in for adaptation, for mitigation, and whatever money is coming in is coming with conditionalities, And also, it's very difficult. It's very difficult for us for even our negotiators to negotiate because, they demand climate justice. The next thing they're told, we will not give you aid if this is what you demand. I think it's important for you, for the youth of Europe, to hold your governments to account. The historical responsibility, the debts that you owe to developing countries. You owe us a debt. That's something that I need to emphasize. You owe us a debt. A lot of the companies that are getting oil, that are getting coal in Africa, Latin America, and Asia are based in Europe. They're based in North America. They're based in Australia. They damage our land. They take away our territories. They collude with corrupt governments. They collude with the military to constantly oppress people. It's important that solidarity from you means that you hold your governments to account. You hold your corporations to account. You hold your militaries to account. That's absolutely important. And you must engage with the issues of race. You must engage with the issues of class solidarity, and even intra-class solidarity is absolutely important. It's absolutely essential. We cannot get climate justice if we speak issues of race, issues of class, issues of gender. And I want to go further and speak not when you talk about gender, not just cis men and cis women. We need to talk about broad issues. We need to dismantle transphobia in our movements. We need to dismantle homophobia. We need to make our movements as inclusive as possible. We also need, finally, and this is something that I'll finish by saying that, remember to center the voices of those in the front lines and those who are most marginalized. Remember to decenter, for those of us who, for example, I say that I'm an African woman, I'm also a middle-class African woman, so my experiences are not the same as the experiences of a rural African women, and I do understand that. I come to this with my own privileges, but it's important to decenter their experiences, their voices. There's nothing like, when people talk about there's nothing like the voice of the voiceless. As Arundhati Roy. You can look her up if you don't know her. She says there's nothing like the voiceless. It's only people who've been silenced. People are constantly speaking out against the injustice that they face. We need to listen. We need to ensure that spaces for them to speak, to articulate themselves, and for them to get the justice that they require is there. Finally, justice, the concepts, the ideas of justice, that can only be determined by those who are most affected, not the most privileged. This is saying that the IMF, the World Bank, Shell, Chevron, BP, Monsanto cannot decide what climate justice means to us or to anyone. They have created this crisis. They have no right to tell us what climate justice means to us. So finally, go out there, be as radical as possible. Remember to be in solidarity and ask what kind of solidarity people want and need. Don't just give solidarity. Sometimes it can be so problematic the way we attempt to show solidarity. And we need to have real conversations where we treat each other as equals and as peers, and to be very cognizant of the privileges that we have. So I guess I'm just going to say thank you, and I'm really looking forward to meeting all of you, or those who are going to be in Paris. Look out for me, say hi to me, and I'm going to say hi back. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your time.